My ex-husband told me I'd never be more than a broken woman as I signed away everything in that courtroom. My home, my career, my dignity. 6 months later, I was cleaning tables at a café, hiding my face from former clients who whispered and pointed. Then a man in a gray suit walked in and asked my name, and with those simple words, my entire world shattered and rebuilt itself in ways I never could have imagined. What happened next didn't just change my life. It exposed secrets that had been buried for decades and turned me into the one person my ex-husband feared most. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you are watching from today. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories the gavel struck, and with it, the last remnants of my old life shattered into 1,000 irretrievable pieces. I sat across from Ethan in that cold courtroom, watching his expensive lawyers exchange satisfied glances as I signed away everything. The house, the car, the savings account I'd built before we even met. All of it gone. His lawyers had made sure of that, twisting every clause, every loophole, until I had nothing left to fight with. Ethan leaned back in his chair, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The same smile that once made me feel loved now made my stomach turn. As I set down the pen, he leaned forward, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You'll never be more than a broken woman, Anna." The words hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to tell him exactly what I thought of him and his cruelty. But I just sat there, frozen, as the judge finalized our divorce. The sound of that gavel echoed in my chest like a funeral bell. Outside the courthouse, I loaded my few belongings into my decade-old sedan. The one thing they couldn't take because it was technically worthless. 3 boxes. That's what my marriage had been reduced to. 3 cardboard boxes filled with clothes, a few books, and photographs I should have burned. When I pulled up to the mansion, my mansion, the one I designed myself, Vanessa was waiting at the door. Ethan's new fiancée. She wore my old silk robe, the burgundy one I'd loved, and her smile was pure venom. "Don't forget anything," she said sweetly. "We're redecorating." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just loaded the last box, climbed into my car, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I watched the house, my dream home, shrink smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. The apartment I could afford was a studio above a laundromat in the cheapest part of downtown. The walls were yellowed, the bathroom tiles cracked, and at night, I could hear every conversation from the neighbors on either side. But it was mine. Or at least it was all I had. Finding work was harder than I'd imagined. My reputation had been thoroughly destroyed. Ethan made sure of that. Every design firm I approached had heard the rumors that I was unstable, vindictive, impossible to work with. Doors closed before I could even finish introducing myself. 3 weeks after the divorce, I took a job cleaning tables at a cafe called Rosa's Place. The owner, Rosa Martinez, was a round-faced woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hands that had seen decades of hard work. She didn't ask questions when I applied. She just looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "When can you start?" I started the next morning. Every day, I wore an old baseball cap and kept my head down, praying no one would recognize me. But they did. Former clients would walk in, do a double take, and whisper to their companions. I became an expert at pretending I didn't see them, at making myself invisible while I wiped down tables and refilled sugar dispensers. Rosa noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "You don't have to tell me," she said one afternoon as we closed up. "But whatever happened to you, it doesn't define you. You hear me?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. One evening, as I was serving coffee to the late-shift customers, the cafe door opened, and a man in a gray suit walked in. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp, observant eyes. He sat in the corner booth and ordered black coffee, but I could feel him watching me throughout his visit. When I brought his cup, he looked up at me directly. "Anna Taylor?" My heart stopped. "Yes." He studied me for a long moment, then simply nodded, left a $20 bill for a $4 coffee, and walked out. Rosa cornered me in the kitchen immediately. "Who was that?" "I don't know." Men in suits don't just show up asking about you for no reason. You okay, honey?
I'm fine, Elite.
But I wasn't fine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the encounter, trying to remember if I'd seen him before. Had Ethan sent him? Was this some new way to humiliate me? The next morning, while organizing my apartment, I found an old handbag I hadn't used in months. Inside was an envelope still sealed. My hands trembled as I recognized the handwriting on the front. Richard Coleman, Ethan's father. The letter was dated a week before my divorce was finalized. Anna, come see me. It's important.
RC.
My chest tightened. I grabbed my phone and searched Richard Coleman's name. The first result made my blood run cold. Richard Coleman, CEO of Coleman Group, dies at 71. The article was dated 2 weeks ago. While I'd been signing away my life in that courtroom, Richard had been dying. And I'd never received his message. I stared at his photograph on the screen, a dignified man with Ethan's features but softer eyes. He'd always been kind to me at company events, asking about my design projects, actually listening when I spoke. Unlike his son, Richard saw people, not just their usefulness. And now he was gone. 2 days later, the man in the gray suit returned to Rosa's. It was late evening, almost closing time. Rosa had already left, trusting me to lock up. When he walked in, I recognized him immediately. "Are you Anna Taylor?" he asked again. "Yes." My voice was steadier this time. "My name is James Hale. I'm the legal executor of Richard Coleman's estate." He pulled out a business card. "I've been looking for you." I took the card with shaking hands. "Why?" Mr. Hale's expression was unreadable. "Because Richard Coleman named you as the sole heir to his entire estate. The mansion, the assets, and full ownership of the Coleman Group." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But there's one condition." The café seemed to tilt around me. That's impossible." "I assure you, Miss Taylor, it's quite real." He pulled out a leather portfolio. "However, you must agree to serve as CEO of the Coleman Group for 1 full year. If you quit or step down before then, everything, the company, the estate, all of it, reverts to Ethan Coleman." I laughed. It was a hollow, broken sound. "You're telling me I'm supposed to run a multi-million-dollar company? I can't even pay rent, Mr. Hale. I clean tables for a living." "That's exactly what Richard wanted to see," Mr. Hale said softly. "Whether you could stand where others said you couldn't." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my lumpy mattress, staring at the business card Mr. Hale had given me, trying to make sense of the impossible choice before me. Take over a company I knew nothing about running, face Ethan's wrath, and risk complete humiliation, or walk away and keep cleaning tables for the rest of my life, knowing I'd turn down a chance at redemption. By dawn, I'd made my decision. Mr. Hale picked me up at noon in a Blacktown car that probably cost more than everything I owned. The drive to the Coleman estate took 40 minutes, winding through increasingly affluent neighborhoods until we reached the gated community where Ethan had grown up. The mansion was exactly as I remembered from the few times I'd visited: cold, modern, all glass and sharp angles. Nothing like the warm home I designed for Ethan and myself. This was a monument to wealth, not a place meant for living. The staff assembled in the foyer as we entered. They stared at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. I was wearing my nicest outfit, a dress I'd bought for job interviews that hadn't panned out, and I felt like an imposter. One of the maids, an older woman named Margaret, stepped forward. Her voice was barely a whisper, but I heard every word. "You're the woman he ruined." I met her gaze.
Yes.
"I am." Mr. Hale led me through the mansion, showing me Richard's study, the master bedroom, the garage with 3 cars I didn't know how to drive. Everything felt surreal, like I was walking through someone else's dream. In the study, I found photographs on the walls, images from company galas and charity events. In several of them, I appeared in the background, usually explaining a design concept or speaking with clients. Richard had kept them. He'd been watching. I opened the desk drawer and found a leather journal. The last entry was dated 3 days before his death. She saw beauty where Ethan saw control. If she's reading this, I made the right choice. My vision blurred with tears. Why me? I asked Mr. Hale. Why not a professional CEO? Someone qualified. You designed the flagship Coleman Towers, he replied. Every major project in the last 5 years used your concepts, even if Ethan took credit. Richard knew who really built his empire.
The tears spilled over then.
I'd thought everyone had forgotten that my work had been erased along with my marriage. News of the inheritance broke the next morning. My phone, which rarely rang anymore, exploded with notifications. Reporters, former colleagues, people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly very interested in my well-being. And then Ethan showed up. He stormed into the mansion without knocking, his face red with rage. Margaret tried to stop him, but he pushed past her, finding me in Richard's study. You conniving bitch, he snarled. You manipulated him. You. I didn't even know, I said quietly. I found out 2 days ago. You think you can handle what I built? He stepped closer, trying to intimidate me the way he used to. You're nothing. You'll destroy everything within a month. I stood up, meeting his eyes. Something had shifted in me. Maybe it was Richard's faith, or maybe I'd just hit the bottom hard enough to bounce back. I'm not handling your empire, Ethan. I'm reclaiming mine. He left, but I knew this was just the beginning. The first board meeting was a disaster. 12 directors, all men, all loyal to Ethan. They sat around the massive conference table, arms crossed, barely concealing their contempt. With all due respect, one of them began, which meant no respect at all. A cleaner running the Coleman Group? This is a joke. Another chimed in. We should contest the will. Richard was clearly not in his right mind. I sat at the head of the table, Richard's chair, and listened. I took notes. I didn't argue or defend myself. I just watched and learned who would be my enemies. As the meeting ended, a younger executive lingered behind. Daniel Cho, the nameplate on his folder read. He waited until we were alone. Miss Taylor, I worked directly under Richard for 3 years. He talked about you often. Daniel's voice was respectful. He always said you had more spine than his son. I believe him. Thank you. I managed. I'm on your side, he said simply. Whatever you need. Over the next week, I barely slept. Daniel helped me understand the company's structure, the ongoing projects, the financial reports. It was overwhelming, but gradually, patterns emerged. And then I found it. The Horizon Towers project, Ethan's current flagship development, was based entirely on blueprints I designed 2 years ago. My original concepts, my innovations, even my handwriting on the initial sketches. He'd stolen everything and claimed it as his vision. I could expose him immediately, destroy him in one press conference. But something Richard had written in his journal stopped me. Patience is power. Strike when they've forgotten you're watching. I continued my research. Late one night, I found another note from Richard, tucked into a file marked private. If you're reading this, they've already turned against you. Trust your instincts, not their promises. 2 weeks after the disastrous board meeting, I stood outside the Coleman Group headquarters in the pouring rain. The building was 40 stories of glass and steel, designed to intimidate. I was trembling, exhausted, terrified. But I thought of that courtroom, of Ethan's smirk, of his parting words, "You'll never be more than a broken woman." You wanted to see if I'd fight? I whispered to Richard's memory. Then watch me. I walked through the glass doors, my cheap shoes squeaking on the marble floor. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Good morning," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'm Anna Taylor, the new CEO. Let's get to work." The learning curve was brutal. Every day brought new challenges, new corporate jargon, new ways I could fail publicly. I stayed in the office until midnight most nights, studying contracts and financial reports until my eyes burned. The staff whispered whenever I walked by. Some pitied me. Most doubted I'd last a month. Daniel became my lifeline. He explained which directors were truly dangerous, which projects were hemorrhaging money, where Ethan had left traps in the budget. Without him, I would have drowned in the first week. "Why are you helping me?" I asked one late evening as we reviewed quarterly projections. He looked up from his laptop. Because Richard believed in you. That's enough for me. But Ethan wasn't finished. His revenge came swiftly and mercilessly. First, leaked documents suggested I'd mismanaged funds, completely fabricated, but convincing enough to make headlines. Waitress CEO, already in over her head, the business section screamed. Then, anonymous sources told reporters I'd had an inappropriate relationship with Richard, a disgusting lie that made my skin crawl but was impossible to completely disprove. Finally, someone, probably Ethan, filed a complaint with the SEC, triggering an investigation into the company's finances. Legitimate business ground to a halt as auditors descended on our offices. I wanted to quit. Every morning, I woke up wanting to walk away. But then Rosa came to visit. She showed up at the mansion unannounced, carrying a box of pastries from the café. Margaret tried to turn her away, but I heard Rosa's voice and ran to the door. "Honey," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "You look terrible." I laughed and cried at the same time. We sat in Richard's study, and I told her everything. The sabotage, the media's attacks, the constant fear of failure. "You're not fighting for money," Rosa said firmly. "You're fighting for your name. For every woman who was told she wasn't good enough." She squeezed my hand. "Don't you dare give them the satisfaction of watching you quit." That night, Daniel and I made a breakthrough. Hidden in old financial records, we found a secret account tied to Ethan's name. He'd been embezzling from his father's company for years, millions of dollars funneled into offshore accounts. "This is it," Daniel said, excitement in his voice. "This destroys him." "Not yet," I said, thinking of Richard's advice. "If we reveal this now, the scandal could take down the entire company. We need to be strategic." 3 days later, I discovered a betrayal much closer to home. Margaret, the maid who'd called me the woman he ruined, had been recording my private meetings. She'd leaked my confidential conversations to Ethan, giving him advance warning of every move I planned. Instead of firing her immediately, I set a trap. In a meeting I knew she was recording, I revealed fake plans to restructure the company, plans that would only benefit Ethan if he acted on them immediately. He took the bait. Within days, Ethan began selling off assets based on my false information, weakening his own financial position while I quietly strengthened mine. But he wasn't done fighting. The investor presentation was supposed to be my moment to prove myself. I'd prepared for weeks, building a comprehensive strategy to take the Coleman Group in a new direction: sustainable development, ethical construction practices, community investment. Everything Richard had dreamed of, but never implemented. I stood before 200 investors, dressed in a suit Daniel had helped me pick out, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. Halfway through my presentation, the door burst open. Ethan strode in, flanked by 2 lawyers, his expression furious. "This meeting is over," he announced. "This woman has no legal right to represent the Coleman Group." The room erupted in confusion. Investors began talking all at once. I gripped the podium, my carefully prepared speech forgotten. "Mr. Coleman," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "you were removed from this company 2 years before your father's death. You have no authority here." "My father was mentally compromised when he made that ridiculous will," Ethan shot back. "Everyone knows you manipulated." "Your father was the sharpest mind in this industry until the day he died," I interrupted. "And he saw what you really are." I turned back to the investors. "If you'll allow me to continue, I'd like to show you something your previous CEO never wanted you to see." On the screen behind me, I displayed Richard's sustainability proposal, a project he designed years ago that Ethan had buried because it would reduce short-term profits. Next to it, I showed my own updated version, incorporating modern technology and community partnerships. "This is the future Richard Coleman envisioned," I said. "Not maximum profit at any cost, but responsible growth that benefits everyone. This is the company I intend to build." The investors were silent for a long moment. Then, from the back of the room, one began to clap. Others joined. Within seconds, the applause was deafening. Ethan's face went pale. He turned and walked out, his lawyers scrambling to follow. I finished the presentation in a daze. When it ended, 3 major investors approached me with handshake agreements to fund the new sustainable initiative. Daniel stood in the back, grinning. The media narrative began to shift. From café cleaner to CEO. The woman who revived Coleman Group, Forbes wrote. The Wall Street Journal published a profile titled Anna Taylor's Unlikely Empire. Public opinion was turning in my favor. Social media exploded with support, particularly from women who saw their own struggles reflected in my story. But I knew Ethan wouldn't stop. The more I succeeded, the more desperate he'd become. Late one night, I found another entry in Richard's journal. This one was dated just a week before his death. Legacy belongs to integrity, not blood. I only wish I'd had the courage to admit this while Ethan was young enough to learn. By giving Anna what he wanted most, perhaps I can teach him what truly matters, though I fear it's too late. I closed the journal, feeling the weight of Richard's hopes on my shoulders. The next morning, I sent Ethan a carefully crafted email. It contained false information suggesting Daniel was secretly working against me, stealing company secrets. It was bait, obvious bait to anyone thinking clearly. But Ethan was past thinking clearly. He responded within an hour, forwarding my email to his lawyers and accidentally including a thread where he detailed his own illegal activities, bribes, fraud, manipulation of stock prices. He'd been so eager to use my supposed weakness against me that he'd exposed himself completely. I'd set up hidden cameras to record the exchange. Every word, every incriminating detail, captured in high definition. I sat back in Richard's chair, staring at the evidence on my screen. This was it. The ammunition I needed to destroy Ethan forever. But somehow, victory felt hollow. I thought I'd feel triumphant when this moment came. Instead, I just felt tired. Daniel knocked and entered. Are you ready? Ready for what? To end this, he said quietly. We have everything we need. I looked at the evidence again, proof of Ethan's crimes, his lies, his systematic destruction of everything his father built. Then let's finish it, I said. Ethan's counterattack came from an unexpected angle. His lawyers filed a motion claiming Richard's will was fraudulent, that I'd manipulated a dying man for control of his empire. They subpoenaed medical records, interviewed nurses, and built a case suggesting Richard had been mentally incompetent when he made his final decisions. The courtroom became a circus. Media camped outside the courthouse. Every day brought new headlines, new accusations, new ways my character could be questioned. Miss Taylor, Ethan's lead attorney said during cross-examination, isn't it true you visited Richard Coleman multiple times in the months before his death?
No, irraplia calmly.
I last saw Richard at a company gala 14 months before he passed. I was still married to his son at the time. But you sent him messages, didn't you? Emails? I sent him design proposals for company projects. That was my job. The lawyer smiled, shark-like. Or were you ingratiating yourself to a vulnerable, dying man? I felt my composure crack. Richard Coleman was not vulnerable. He was brilliant and kind, and he saw through his son's manipulation years before I did. Objection. Ethan's lawyer shouted, but the damage was done. Under the constant pressure, I began to doubt everything. Late at night in the mansion, I stared at Richard's portrait in the study and asked the question that haunted me. Did you choose me out of faith, or just to spite your son? Daniel found me there one evening, tears streaming down my face. He trusted your soul, not your name, Daniel said gently. I saw it every day. The way he lit up when discussing your designs. The way he defended you even after the divorce. This wasn't spite, Anna. This was love. But the public assault continued. Someone leaked a video of me crying alone after a particularly brutal board meeting. The footage showed me at my most vulnerable, makeup smeared, shoulders shaking with sobs. The media mocked me. Breaking down already? One headline read, CEO can't handle the pressure, said another. But something unexpected happened. Women across the country rallied online. Hashtag #IStandWithAnna trended on Twitter. Thousands of women shared their own stories of being underestimated, dismissed, broken down and rebuilt. We see you, Anna. One post read. And we've been where you are. Don't stop fighting. Their support gave me strength when I had nothing left. Then Daniel uncovered something that changed everything. One of the board members who'd been most vocal against me, Victoria Marsh, was having an affair with Ethan. She'd been the one leaking confidential information, sabotaging projects, feeding ammunition to his lawyers.
We can use this, Daniel said.
Force her to testify. But before I could act, Vanessa showed up at my office. Ethan's fiancée looked different from the smug woman who'd stood in my doorway months ago. Her confidence was gone, replaced by nervous energy. She clutched a designer handbag like a shield. I need to talk to you, she said. Alone. Security escorted Daniel out. Vanessa sat across from my desk, not meeting my eyes. He's worse than you know, she said finally.
Ethan.
He's not who I thought he was. Then leave him. I said, no sympathy in my voice. It's not that simple.
She pulled out a USB drive.
He has these hidden accounts in the Cayman Islands. Millions he stole from the company, from his father. I thought you should know. Why help me now? Vanessa finally looked up. Because I saw that video of you crying. And I realized that could be me in a year. He destroyed you, and he'll destroy me too. Eventually, he destroys everyone. I took the USB drive. Thank you. She stood to leave, then paused at the door.
I'm sorry.
For everything. The robe. The smirk. All of it. After she left, I opened the files on the USB drive. Vanessa wasn't exaggerating. Ethan had been systematically stealing from the Coleman Group for over a decade. The evidence was damning, irrefutable. I called an emergency board meeting. Every director filed into the conference room, their expressions ranging from hostile to curious. Victoria Marsh took her usual seat, perfectly composed, not knowing what was coming. I stood at the head of the table and plugged in my laptop. Gentlemen and Victoria, I want to thank you for your patience during this difficult transition. I began. I know many of you doubted my ability to lead this company. Some of you actively worked against me.
Victoria shifted uncomfortably.
But Richard Coleman didn't choose me because I was the most qualified. I continued. He chose me because I understood something his son never did, that true leadership isn't about power. It's about integrity. I clicked to the first slide. These are offshore accounts in Ethan Coleman's name. Over $15 million stolen from this company over the past 12 years. The room exploded. Directors talked over each other, demanding to see the evidence, questioning the source. I let them talk. Then I clicked to the next slide, Richard's handwritten journal entry, the one about integrity and legacy. This is what your real heir looks like, I said quietly. A man who stole from his own father. Who manipulated everyone around him, who would destroy this entire company if it meant getting what he wanted.
Victoria stood abruptly.
This is absurd. You're fabricating. Sit down, Victoria, I said coldly. Or would you like me to share the phone records between you and Ethan? The ones where you coordinated leaking my confidential meetings. Her face went white. She sat. The authorities have been notified. I continued. Ethan Coleman will be arrested within the hour. And Victoria, you'll be receiving a subpoena to testify about your role in this conspiracy. I closed my laptop and looked at each director in turn.
Now.
Does anyone else want to question my leadership? Silence. 2 hours later, I watched from Richard's study as security escorted Ethan from the building in handcuffs. News cameras swarmed him. His lawyers shouted no comment as reporters hurled questions. As they pushed him into the police car, Ethan looked up at the window where I stood. Even from that distance, I could see the hatred in his eyes. You think you've won? He screamed, his voice carrying across the plaza. You're still nothing without me. You'll always be nothing. I didn't respond. I just stood there, watching, as they drove him away. When I finally turned from the window, I found myself alone in Richard's study. The weight of everything, the months of fighting, the humiliation, the constant battle, crashed over me all at once. I collapsed into Richard's chair and sobbed. Great, heaving sobs that seemed to tear something loose inside me. For the first time since that courtroom, I let myself feel the full magnitude of what I'd been through. "You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself," I whispered to Richard's portrait. "I hope I made you proud." The next morning, I visited Rose's café one last time. She was behind the counter, the same warm smile on her face, completely unaware of everything that had happened. "Anna," she exclaimed, "haven't seen you in ages. Coffee?" "Actually," I said, sliding an envelope across the counter, "I came to give you something." Inside was a deed, the café building, purchased in Rose's name. "What is this?" she asked, confused. "You gave me work when no one else would," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You treated me like a person when the rest of the world treated me like garbage. I can never repay that, but this is a start." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "Honey, I can't." "You can," I insisted. "The building is yours.
No rent, no mortgage.
Just keep being the wonderful person you are." We hugged for a long time, both of us crying. As I left the cafe, I felt lighter than I had in months. The battle wasn't over. There would be trials, testimonies, endless legal proceedings. But the war was won. I walked through the Coleman Group headquarters the next day with my head high. Sunlight streamed through the glass atrium, casting everything in gold. Employees looked up as I passed, and for the first time, there was no mockery in their eyes. Some nodded respectfully. Others smiled. I was no longer the broken woman Ethan had promised I'd always be. I was Anna Taylor, designer, CEO, survivor. But as I settled into my office, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A car was parked across the street, its driver watching the building. Watching me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think it's over?" "It's only beginning." I stared at the message, my triumph suddenly uncertain. Richard's empire was mine. Ethan was defeated. But somewhere out there, a new threat was waiting. And this time, I had everything to lose. The car was still there the next morning. And the morning after that. Security reported a man repeatedly parking near the headquarters, always watching, never approaching. I told myself it was paranoia, residual fear from months of Ethan's attacks. But the feeling of being hunted wouldn't leave me. Then the letter arrived. It appeared on my desk one morning, placed carefully on top of my other mail. No postage. No return address. Just my name in elegant script across the front. Inside, a single line, "Richard's promise wasn't just to you." My hands trembled as I called Mr. Hale. "There's been a development," he said carefully when he arrived at my office an hour later. "Another individual has come forward. He claims to be Richard Coleman's heir." The room seemed to tilt.
What?
"That's impossible. His name is Liam Grayson." Hale opened his briefcase and pulled out a file. "He says he's Richard's illegitimate son from a relationship decades ago. He has documentation, birth certificates, photos, letters from Richard." I stared at the photograph in the file. The man looked to be in his late 30s, with Richard's strong jawline and the same intense eyes. The resemblance was undeniable. "Is it real?" I whispered. "The documents appear authentic," Hale admitted. "But there are inconsistencies. I'm investigating, but if his claim holds up legally, everything I've built crumbles." I finished his sentence. The board meeting that afternoon was chaos. Directors who'd finally accepted my leadership now questioned everything. Investors began making nervous calls. The media, always hungry for drama, pounced on the story. "Secret Son challenges waitress CEO." The headline screamed. "Coleman Empire in turmoil as new heir emerges." "We need to see proof," one director insisted. "If this man is Richard's biological son, then what?" I interrupted. "I've spent a year rebuilding this company. You want to hand it over to a stranger?" "A stranger with a blood claim," Victoria's replacement pointed out. "That's not nothing." I wanted to scream. Instead, I gathered my notes and stood. "I'm not stepping down. If Mr. Grayson wants to challenge my position, he can do it legally. Until then, we continue as planned." But the damage was spreading. Investors pulled back from the Sustainable Development Project. Stock prices fluctuated wildly. Everything I'd worked for was suddenly uncertain. Daniel found me in Richard's study that evening, staring at the portrait. "You can't let them see you doubt yourself," he said gently. "What if he's telling the truth?" I asked. "What if Richard had another family, another son who deserves this more than I do?" "You deserve this because you earned it," Daniel insisted. "Blood doesn't make you worthy. Actions do." 2 days later, Liam Grayson came to the mansion. He arrived in a silver Mercedes, dressed in an immaculate suit that probably cost more than my first car. Security called ahead, and I watched from the window as he approached the front entrance with quiet confidence. Margaret showed him to the study. When he walked in, I felt my breath catch. The resemblance to Richard was stunning, not just in appearance, but in the way he moved, the calm authority he projected. "Miss Taylor," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for seeing me." His handshake was firm but not aggressive. His smile seemed genuine. But I'd learned to distrust charm. "Mr. Grayson, you've caused quite a stir." "I don't want your empire," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I only want what's rightfully mine. My father supported my mother and me for 30 years. Surely you can understand wanting to claim your inheritance." His words were reasonable. His tone was measured. But something about him made my skin crawl. "If you're Richard's son, why wait until now?" I asked. I didn't know he'd passed until recently. My mother kept me away from his public life. She didn't want the scandal. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'm not here to destroy what you've built. I respect what you've accomplished. I almost wish the company were truly yours." That last sentence hung in the air like a threat wrapped in velvet. After he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been manipulated. Everything he said was perfect, too perfect, like lines rehearsed for maximum impact. Daniel was already digging into Liam's background when I called him that night. "I found something," he said, his voice tight. "Liam Grayson is backed by a private investment group, Meridian Capital. Want to guess who's their silent partner?" My stomach dropped.
No.
"Someone connected to Ethan. I don't have proof yet, but the money trail leads back to some of his old associates." So this was Ethan's final revenge. Even from prison, he'd found a way to tear me down. Over the next week, the media frenzy intensified. Tabloids published old photos of Richard with a mysterious woman, Liam's mother, apparently. The story had everything: secret love, hidden children, betrayed inheritances. My support began to crumble. Social media, which had once championed me, now turned skeptical. If there's a real son, shouldn't he inherit? People asked. Blood matters. I caught Daniel in a late-night meeting with Liam in a coffee shop downtown. I'd been leaving the office when I saw them through the window, Daniel and Liam, sitting across from each other, documents spread between them. Daniel was nodding, taking notes. I pushed through the door, my heart pounding. What the hell is this? Daniel looked up, guilty surprise flashing across his face. Liam simply smiled. "Anna, wait," Daniel started. "Whose side are you on?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "After everything." "Let me explain." "Get out," I said to Daniel. "You're fired." Liam stood, gathering his papers. "Miss Taylor, this isn't what it looks like. Both of you,
Get out."
I drove home in a haze of anger and betrayal. Daniel had been my only ally, the only person I'd truly trusted. And now he'd been secretly meeting with the man trying to take everything from me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the mansion, feeling the walls close in. Without Daniel, without proof to counter Liam's claim, how could I possibly survive? At dawn, I found myself back at Rose's cafe. She was opening up just like always. "Honey, you look terrible," she said, pulling me into a hug. "I think I'm about to lose everything," I whispered. We sat at the same table where I used to clean, and I told her everything. The mysterious heir, Daniel's betrayal, the crumbling foundation of my new life. "Guess I've come full circle," I said bitterly. "Back where I started." Rosa reached across the table and gripped my hand. "Not full circle, honey. full strength. You're not the same broken woman who walked in here a year ago. You've got fight in you now. But what if I'm fighting for something that was never mine? Then you walk away with your head held high, knowing you gave it everything. She squeezed my hand. But I don't think that's what's happening here. I think someone's trying to make you quit. Her words stayed with me as I drove back to the mansion. Someone was trying to make me quit. Ethan's final lesson: if he couldn't have the empire, I shouldn't either. Mr. Hale was waiting when I arrived. I need to show you something, he said, leading me to Richard's study. He opened the safe, one I hadn't known existed, and pulled out a sealed envelope. Richard left instructions. This was only to be opened if someone challenged your claim to the inheritance. He handed it to me. He knew this might happen. Inside was a letter in Richard's handwriting. Anna, if you're reading this, someone has tried to take what I gave you. Don't trust everything you see. Trust what you know to be true. Look for the key where we first understood each other. Where you first understood each other? Hale asked. What does that mean? I closed my eyes, thinking back. Where had Richard and I truly connected? Then I remembered a company gala 3 years ago. We'd both escaped to the design library, tired of small talk. We'd spent an hour discussing architecture, philosophy, the purpose of creating beautiful spaces. He'd told me buildings should serve humanity, not ego. The design library, I said. At the old headquarters. The building had been converted into archives after the company moved. Hale and I drove there immediately, searching through rooms of old files and abandoned furniture. In the library, I found it, a hollowed-out book on the shelf where Richard and I had once stood. Inside was another USB drive and a handwritten will, dated 1 week before his death. My hands shook as I plugged in the drive. Richard's face appeared on the screen, gaunt but alert. The video was dated days before he died. Anna, his recorded voice said, if you're watching this, someone has challenged my decision. Let me be clear. You are my chosen heir, not because I owed you anything, but because you embody everything this company should be. Integrity, vision, compassion. He paused, adjusting something off camera. I know about Liam. His mother and I had a brief relationship decades ago, yes. I supported them financially, generously, for 30 years. But Liam was raised knowing he'd receive a settlement, not the company. His mother agreed. The papers are in the secondary vault. The video continued for 10 more minutes, detailing Richard's reasoning, his disappointments with Ethan, his hopes for what I might build. When it ended, I sat in stunned silence. This changes everything, Hale said. With this video and the documents he mentioned, Liam's claim falls apart. But I felt hollow. It doesn't matter. The board has already turned against me again. The investors are pulling out. Even if we prove Liam's claim is false, the damage is done. The hearing was set for the following week. Liam's lawyers had filed formal challenges. Mine had countered. The courtroom would decide the fate of the Coleman empire. The night before, the Coleman Group headquarters caught fire. I got the call at 3 a.m. By the time I arrived, flames were pouring from the upper floors. Firefighters battled the blaze, while police held back crowds and media. The evidence, I gasped, grabbing the fire chief. Richard's archives. They're on the 7th floor. Ma'am, the building isn't safe. I ran toward the entrance. Security tried to stop me, but I pushed past them. Smoke filled the lobby. Alarms shrieked. Through the chaos, I saw the stairwell door. Daniel appeared out of nowhere, grabbing my arm. Anna, stop. You'll die in there. Let me go. I struggled against him. Everything we need to prove Richard's will is in there. It's not worth your life. It's worth everything. A firefighter tackled me before I could reach the stairs. I fought, screaming, as they dragged me back outside. Daniel held me as I collapsed, watching the building burn. But then I saw it, a fireproof box near the entrance, partially hidden by debris. I broke free and ran toward it before anyone could stop me. The heat was incredible. Smoke burned my lungs. My hands blistered as I grabbed the box, but I held on, stumbling back toward the entrance as a beam crashed behind me. Paramedics descended immediately, treating my burns, checking for smoke inhalation. But I clutched the box, refusing to let go. Inside was Richard's original ledgers, handwritten records of his support for Liam's mother, including her signed agreement that Liam would receive a financial settlement but no claim to the company. And a USB drive labeled in Richard's writing, for the one who stayed when all others left. Daniel sat beside me in the ambulance, his face streaked with soot. "I wasn't betraying you," he said quietly. "I was pretending to work with Liam to expose his financiers. They're laundering money through his claim, Anna. I have proof." I looked at him, really looked at him. His eyes were red, whether from smoke or tears. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed you to react naturally. If Liam suspected you knew I was a double agent, he'd have disappeared with all the evidence." He pulled out his phone, showing me recordings of meetings, bank transfers, incriminating conversations. "I'm sorry I hurt you, but I was trying to protect you." A tear ran down my cheek. "I fired you." "I know. But I never stopped working for you." He took my bandaged hand carefully. "This time I lead, and you follow my terms. That's what you said, remember? I followed your terms, even when it cost me your trust." The ambulance took us to the hospital. My burns were second degree, but manageable. The smoke inhalation would heal. But the emotional exhaustion was overwhelming. Rosa arrived as they were bandaging my hands, Margaret trailing behind her with surprising concern. "You crazy girl," Rosa said, tears in her eyes. "Running into a burning building." "I had to save Richard's legacy." "Richard's legacy is you," she insisted. "Not some papers. You." Margaret stepped forward hesitantly. "Miss Taylor, I'm sorry. For everything. For recording you, for helping Ethan. You showed me more grace than I deserved when you could have destroyed me." I looked at her, this woman who'd betrayed me, and felt only exhaustion. We all make choices we regret. The fire investigation concluded it was arson. Security footage showed someone entering the building hours before the fire started. The figure was obscured, but the timing matched Liam's known movements. Police arrested him the next morning. Under questioning, he confessed, not to the arson directly, but to the larger conspiracy. He'd been hired by Ethan's former business partners to destabilize the company, create chaos, and force a hostile takeover. The investment group backing him was exposed. Money laundering, securities fraud, conspiracy. But the damage to the Coleman Group was catastrophic. Investors fled. Stock prices plummeted. The Sustainable Development Project was canceled. Everything I'd built was collapsing. The board called for my resignation. Again. I sat in that conference room, burned hands bandaged, exhausted beyond words, and looked at each director. "I almost died saving this company," I said quietly, "while the person you were ready to hand it over to was trying to burn it down. If you want my resignation, you'll have to take it by force. Because I'm not quitting." The room was silent. "Then we vote," one director said. "All in favor of removing Anna Taylor as CEO?" For hands went up. 6 remained down.
Y de surviva. Barely.
The courtroom was packed for the final hearing. Media lined the walls. Liam sat with his lawyers, confident despite the arson charges. I sat with Daniel and Mr. Hale, my bandaged hands folded in my lap. Liam's lawyers presented their case first: DNA evidence, birth certificates, photos of Richard with Liam's mother. It was compelling, emotional. Several jury members nodded sympathetically. Then it was our turn. Mr. Hale stood, projecting Richard's video testimony onto screens throughout the courtroom. The room went completely silent as Richard spoke from beyond the grave, explaining his relationship with Liam's mother, the financial arrangement, the legal agreement that Liam would receive money, but not the company. "Blood doesn't define worth," Richard's recorded voice said clearly. "Loyalty does. Anna Taylor protected what my own son tried to destroy. She fought for this company when she had nothing to gain and everything to lose. That is the character of a true leader." When the video ended, Hale presented the documents. 30 years of financial records showing Richard had given Liam's mother over $5 million in support. And a signed agreement from Liam's mother acknowledging this, was her son's full inheritance. The plaintiff received his inheritance years ago, Hale concluded. This case is about greed, not justice. Liam's lawyer tried to counter, but the evidence was overwhelming. Then Daniel took the stand, presenting his recordings of Liam's meetings with the investment group. He knew from the beginning he had no legal claim, Daniel testified. This was always about destabilizing the company for a hostile takeover. The arson was meant to destroy evidence and create chaos so his backers could swoop in and buy the company for pennies on the dollar. Liam's composure finally cracked. As his lawyer desperately tried to object, Liam stood up, red-faced. "She stole my birthright," he shouted. "I'm his son, his blood. That company should be mine." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Mr. Grayson, sit down." But Liam kept shouting, all pretense of charm gone. "Everything I did was justified. She's nobody, just some waitress who seduced a dying old man." Security moved toward him as his lawyers tried to pull him back into his seat. "I'm Richard Coleman's son," he screamed as they escorted him out. "I deserve." The doors closed, cutting off his voice. The courtroom erupted in whispers. I sat motionless, barely breathing. When order was restored, the judge reviewed the evidence one final time. Based on the documentation presented, including Richard Coleman's video testimony and the signed agreement with the plaintiff's mother, I rule in favor of the defendant. Anna Taylor is confirmed as the rightful heir to the Coleman Group and all associated assets. Furthermore, I'm recommending the plaintiff face additional charges related to conspiracy and fraud. The gavel fell. I collapsed against Daniel, relief and exhaustion washing over me in equal measure. Rosa was sobbing in the gallery. Mr. Hale allowed himself a small smile. But the victory felt bittersweet. So much had been destroyed in the fight to protect it. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed us. "Ms. Taylor, how does it feel to win? What's next for the Coleman Group? Will you pursue charges against Ethan Coleman for his role in this conspiracy?" I raised my bandaged hands, and they quieted. Richard Coleman believed that empires built on compassion outlive those built on pride, I said. That's the legacy I intend to continue. Not revenge, not power, just honest work and integrity. The headlines the next day read, "The woman they tried to break now owns the empire they stole." But I knew the real work was just beginning. The court revealed during sentencing that Ethan had orchestrated Liam's claim from prison. He'd connected Liam with the investment group, funded the legal challenge, and likely ordered the arson when it became clear Liam's case was failing. His sentence was extended. 20 years became 35. I should have felt satisfaction, but I only felt sad. Sad for the man he could have been if he'd chosen differently. I visited Richard's grave one last time before moving forward. White roses in hand, I stood before the simple headstone. "You saw something in me I never saw in myself," I whispered. "But I earned it now. I promise to honor what you built, not by preserving it exactly as it was, but by making it what it should have been." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I felt his presence, his approval. Back at the office, a letter waited on my desk. Prison postmark. Ethan's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. "You were right. I was afraid of your strength. I'm sorry." 3 sentences. Years too late, but maybe enough. I walked to Richard's old fireplace, still functional in the renovated headquarters, and held the letter to the flames. Not out of hatred, but closure. Watching it burn, I felt something release inside me. The past was finally, truly over. 1 year after the inheritance, exactly to the day, I stood in the grand ballroom of the Coleman estate, preparing for the memorial gala in Richard's honor. The company had recovered. More than recovered, thrived. Under my leadership, the Coleman Group had doubled in value, but more importantly, it had become what Richard always envisioned. A company that built beauty responsibly, that valued people over profit margins, that understood legacy was measured in lives improved, not just dollars earned. Every employee who'd once doubted me now stood in that ballroom, pride evident on their faces. The Sustainable Development Project had been completed ahead of schedule. We'd won 3 industry awards for ethical practices. and our stock price had never been higher. But the gala wasn't about celebrating my success. It was about honoring the man who'd made it possible. I stepped to the podium as the crowd quieted. Richard Coleman once told me that buildings should serve humanity, not ego, I began. At the time, I thought he was talking about architecture. Now I understand he was talking about life, about purpose, about the structures we build in our souls. I paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. They called me broken, and I'd been shattered by betrayal, stripped of everything I'd built, told I'd never be more than a failure. I looked out at the crowd, seeing Rosa dabbing her eyes, Daniel watching with quiet pride, even Margaret nodding encouragement. But what they didn't know is, cracks let the light in, and Richard saw that light when no one else did. He gave me a chance not because I was perfect, but because I'd survived imperfection and come out stronger. The applause was thunderous. After the speech, Daniel found me on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. "That was beautiful," he said softly. "Thank you. For everything. For believing in me when I fired you. For risking everything to protect me." He moved closer. "Anna, I need to tell you something." I turned to face him, seeing vulnerability in his eyes that mirrored my own. "I'm in love with you," he said simply. "I have been for months. Maybe longer. I know the timing might not be right, and I know you've been through hell, but I couldn't let another day pass without." I pressed my finger to his lips, silencing him. "Maybe one day," I said gently. "But right now, I belong to the woman I'm still becoming. I need to stand on my own, be completely whole, before I can share my life with someone." Pain flashed across his face, but he nodded. "I understand. And I'll wait. However long it takes. You might be waiting forever. Then I'll wait forever." He smiled sadly. "Some things are worth it." Inside, Rosa found me near the portrait I'd commissioned, not of Richard or Ethan, but of the café where my second life had begun. The plaque beneath it read, "Where resilience was born." "You remembered," Rosa said, touching the frame gently. "How could I forget? You gave me work when I had nothing, dignity when I felt worthless. You saw me as a person when everyone else saw me as a cautionary tale. And look at you now." Rosa pulled me into a hug. "Running an empire in high heels." I laughed. Comfortable heels. I learned that lesson. The gala continued late into the night. Investors I'd impressed. Employees I'd mentored. Community leaders whose neighborhoods had been transformed by our sustainable projects. They all wanted to thank me, congratulate me, tell me how inspiring my story was. But the words that meant the most came from a young woman who approached me as the event was ending. "Miss Taylor, I'm sorry to bother you." "You're not bothering me," I assured her. "I just wanted to say, I was fired from my job last year. Lost everything. I was living in my car when I read about you. About how you went from cleaning tables to running a company." Tears filled her eyes. "You made me believe I could survive. So I started over. I'm in college now, studying business. And someday, I'm going to build something that matters." I took her hands. "You already have. You survived. That matters more than anything." After she left, I found myself alone in Richard's study. His portrait watched me with those kind, knowing eyes. On the desk was a letter from Ethan, one I'd received that morning but hadn't opened. Unlike the apology, this one was thicker. Inside were pages of honest reflection. How he'd been raised to value power over people. How his father's love had seemed conditional on success. How watching me succeed where he'd failed had forced him to confront the man he'd become. "You were everything I pretended to be," he'd written. And that terrified me. "I'm sorry isn't enough. But it's all I have." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in Richard's desk drawer. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acknowledgement that people were more complex than their worst choices. The following week, I announced the rebranding of the Coleman Group to the Taylor Coleman Foundation. The old name would survive, honoring Richard's legacy, but my mark would define its future. Our new mission statement: building spaces that serve humanity, led by those who understand resilience. The media coverage was overwhelming. My story had resonated beyond business circles. Women's organizations invited me to speak. Universities wanted me for commencement addresses. A publisher offered a book deal. But the invitation I accepted was the simplest one. Rosa's Café had expanded into a small chain, Heart and Field, named after my mother's maiden name. She asked me to cut the ribbon at the newest location. I stood before the modest storefront in a working-class neighborhood, scissors in hand, surrounded by local families and young entrepreneurs who reminded me of myself a year ago. "This café represents second chances," I said to the small crowd. "My friend Rosa gave me one when I had nowhere else to turn. Now we're creating spaces where others can find theirs. Where being broken isn't the end of your story, it's the beginning." I cut the ribbon, and the crowd cheered. Inside, I noticed a young woman nervously filling out a job application at the counter. She wore clothes that had seen better days. Her hands shook slightly as she wrote. I walked over and sat beside her. "First job?" I asked gently. She looked up, startled, then recognized me. Her eyes went wide. "Miss Taylor." "I didn't expect. I'm sorry, I'll get out of your way." "You're exactly where you should be," I said, putting my hand over hers to still the shaking. "We all start somewhere." She smiled, a fragile, hopeful expression that reminded me so much of myself in this same position. As I left the cafe, I paused at the door and looked back. The young woman was laughing with Rosa now, some of her nervousness fading. The cafe was full of people starting over, finding their footing, discovering that rock bottom could become a foundation. I walked out into the morning sunlight, the city stretching before me full of possibility. My phone buzzed with notifications, board meetings, interviews, contracts waiting for signatures. The work never stopped. The empire needed constant attention. But I was no longer afraid of it. No longer uncertain of my place. I was Anna Taylor.
Designer. Asa.
Survivor. Once broken. Now unbreakable. I turned my face to the sun, feeling its warmth, and smiled. The future waited, and for the first time in years, I was ready for it. Behind me, the cafe door chimed as another person entered, seeking their own second chance. The cycle continued. And somewhere, I believed Richard was watching, proud of the legacy he'd left, not in buildings or balance sheets, but in the lives transformed by believing that anyone could rise, regardless of where they started. Sometimes losing everything is how the universe gives you back yourself. I walked forward into my new day, whole and healed, ready to build something that would outlast us all. When someone breaks you down to nothing, do you owe them forgiveness when you rise again? Or is moving forward without them the truest form of freedom? If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of transformation that prove your lowest moment might just be your greatest beginning.